Welcome to our podcast. Today we'll be talking specifically around identity and what it means for central government customers. My name is Anjan and I lead Microsoft's partner engagement for our central gov customers. We are really lucky to be joined today by Aaron Breyer, who should be quite a familiar voice from Microsoft, and also by a wonderful team at Condatis. We have two Chris's on the call and the podcast, Chris Eckl and Chris Tate from Condatis. With that, I will hand it over to each participant for their detailed introduction. Over to you, Aaron.
Howdy, Anjan, and it's great to be back. Here we are again for season 2 of our public sector podcast. And this time, like you say, identity, a key issue at the moment. If anyone's heard any of the things that are sort of being said by the very heart of central government leadership, by sort of Alex Chisholm and co, it's essential that central government move forward to, I think the quote is, make it easier for everyone to access government services. So I'm really excited today to be here with Chris and Chris talking about this key issue. So over to you guys.
So Aaron, Anjan, thank you very much for having us. My name is Chris Tate. I'm the CEO of Condatis. We're based in the delightful city of Edinburgh in Scotland. And obviously, as a Microsoft partner, I'm delighted to speak and share some of our ideas and experience on this podcast. Chris.
Yeah, I'm Chris Eckl, and I'm the Chief Trust Officer of Condatis. And yeah, great. Thanks for the invite. Identity is something we do day in, day out. So thanks, and happy to share our experience.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, everybody, for those wonderful introductions. I'm very excited that this is going to be a very rich conversation. Now, really to kickstart our discussion today, we know that identity has been a critical theme, and of course, the importance has been heightened further in this increasingly digital, or should we call an increasingly virtual world. Aaron, I'm really keen to get your thoughts and views on what identity means for central gov customers and the impact they need to think of when it comes to identity specifically.
Yeah, sure, Anjan. So, firstly, identity is in my sort of past life, my 25 years in the civil service. It's certainly something we've been talking about for a lot of those 25 years. And progress has always been tricky, right? Because I think one of the challenges of identity is not only a sort of a tech and a platform one, but it's even setting the basics of what we mean by it, what the goal is, what's the end state we're trying to get to. And certainly if we look at the latest iteration of how central government are perceiving identity, kind of breaking it down into three things. That they're talking about what it means for the user, as in the citizen. So they're talking about the idea of, access to any service with a single login. They're talking about, simplicity, accessibility, crucially, and those of you that know me well know how important accessibility is to my heart. And safety and privacy, being a key one. They're also talking about identity from a cross department point of view. So they're talking about, service integration, identity trust, and using data across government in a more shared and coherent way when it comes to identity. And then, of course, you've got what government as a whole at the epicenter sees identity as. They see it as a mechanism for, delivering services at a lower cost. If you've only got that singular point of entry, that's, of course, going to help. But critically, reducing things like fraud and error. And certainly if you think of larger tax-based departments, if there was that kind of single identity that was us as a person that followed through from what we do in it as a government interface, but also through to maybe things like banks, what that impact could possibly have on fraud and error prevention. So it's quite a critical thing. It's the starting point of so many enablers. But, with that sort of scale of challenge, to mobilize a single voice and a single approach across government is going to be difficult unless everybody's kind of singing from the same page. So that's kind of my view of the basic landscape. So I suppose, Chris and Chris, what do you hear? How do you feel? What have you seen as how identity is kind of surfacing over government?
Yeah, it's a thank you very much for the intro, Aaron. I think sometimes it's trying to make sure that people understand even just the lexicon of what digital identity is. And we like to keep it quite straightforward and simple. It's about providing a business or an organization or a department with a secure digital front door to their users or services. What we've seen more recently is that more and more people want to have access to data and services remotely, particularly in light of the recent pandemic. And we need to make that as simple and straightforward, as well as being robust and secure. So many organizations are considering how best they can manage their data and that identity. And then more narrowly down to the individual, it's just about making it very clear that a digital identity is purely a digital representation of who you are, and it should let you prove your identity simply and straightforwardly during any sort of interaction or transaction that you need to carry out in a digital identity.
Interesting.
And maybe from the history also, you know, how did government or any organization really come to this concept of identity or digital identity? In the good old days, you know, you had a request to a service, you filled out the form, and that form ended up in some database, and really all there was is you got written back to, and that record of that transaction was implicitly your identity. And then when you had face-to-face transaction with a service at some stage, you know, we bound users, citizens, and gave them some access credential to be able to re-access that transaction. And then as stuff matured, as services matured, we allowed users to self-register to a service, make a transaction, have some credentials, and get back to this. And this really it's more and more going on, because then citizens were thinking, well, I have this different credentials with different services. How could it be, even in one department, have a single credential across several services? And government, and we've seen in the past, you know, want to make it easier for citizens, want to have one credential, so I can just prove that I'm Chris, and I can then go to different services and I'm re-recognized as Chris. So technology-wise, we came from a service or a transaction-bound identity to a service-bound identity to a department-bound identity to a government-bound. We call that federation, where the identity really gets abstracted from the individual record to the individual service, to the individual department, or even to government. So we federate and basically take away that dependencies. That gives loads of advantages over time, obviously, because you have not so many single points where you secure the identity. You abstract it a bit more.
That's interesting. And I suppose from my view, as I'll put my old civil servant hat on now, is there was always a myth that was always bandied around. I'd love to hear from you guys whether this is actually something you do here now, whether we all feel this is still true or it's not. But it was one thing that was always thrown around was the public wouldn't accept a single citizen identity. That was always like the shutdown is people wouldn't accept it. But where we live in a world now where we'll all happily give our identity out to social media organizations left and right, is this still a thing? Is that basic principle of people accepting a government identity? Do we think that's still a thing or not?
It's a very UK-based question, isn't it? But let's actually look at, you know, how we as users of online services act right now. Right now, we actually trust quite a lot of organizations where we have no handle over whatsoever. You know, we trust Facebook, we trust Google, and with all due respect, and we trust Microsoft, and use this Microsoft account to secure other services. And actually, we have no idea when we use a Facebook account and we say, well, we log in with Facebook to a service, what we just use our identifier with Facebook to log into Facebook and then say, Facebook, yes, I'm okay that Flickr uses you as an abstraction point. And we just release data from Facebook. So Facebook actually knows everywhere I use login with Facebook. Likewise, Microsoft knows everywhere I use the Microsoft account to log in with, or Google. You know, it's all those social identity providers have a lot of power, a lot of tracking information. Now, if we abstract this back to our citizen and a common citizen account, there's actually a lot more safety, because the people we trust for this common citizen account is a government organization that is accountable to citizens and does open code and does open up where tracking is happening or not happening. So there is a lot more safety around this than just using a social identity provider. But you know, we are used to just using Apple's Face ID or whatever to log into services and don't care about who tracks us. But actually, we can be far more clearer with a central government account that we know that tracking is more transparent than with any of the social providers, I think.
But I think as well as that, what we've seen is people are, as Chris mentioned, very comfortable with using, in most cases, a social media account to access goods and services on the internet without necessarily having a full awareness of the commercial value of that. But going forward, I think people are becoming more used to operating in a digital scenario, not necessarily having to access goods and services in a face-to-face environment, and they want to be able to do that in a seamless way. And I think there have been examples where data has been held in a single sort of lock and key repository, and that's maybe not the safest way of it working. A cloud-based infrastructure like Azure or a distributed ledger can help mitigate that and provide comfort to a government department putting in place a system which would then maybe alleviate a citizen's concern. But certainly being able to provide a service in which somebody as a citizen or a department can choose to use certain credentials or parts of their digital identity, I think it could be quite empowering for people as they become more and more used to using services in a digital scenario.
I think that's a great point there, Chris, around that sort of digital empowerment, and I think that's definitely something that the government wants to strive towards. So I think between the three of us, we're saying busted on that myth, are we? We're saying that that's not an excuse anymore. We're all willing as citizens to do it. I suppose the other thing to ask you guys about, from a myth busting point of view, though, is that kind of piece around I think the default other excuse is always it's too hard. It's too hard to build a single identity platform. I suppose that for you guys as the wizards, is it? Is it too hard?
Yeah, it's a good question. I guess because we've been working in digital identity for a number of years, for us it's our day job, and I certainly you wouldn't necessarily entrust somebody with doing a specialist service for you if they weren't experts. So it is important to engage with subject matter experts, but I think what's really important is to provide organizations with a strategy and a framework, and we're very happy to do that with people. But also, I think it's there's two bits to go together. It's yes, identity, but it's also data. Data is collated and held, and making sure that data can be migrated seamlessly and you don't get data loss. We've been very experienced in doing that for very large organizations and government departments. And people want to know that if they're going to go on this digital identity journey, that they're doing it with somebody who has a safe set of hands, with a really strong framework within which you operate. And that's what we do day in, day out, whether it's for a public sector enterprise as well as private sector.
No, okay. Yeah, I agree. It's not too hard. The point is, and coming back to the technology has evolved. And, from the old way of doing identity, and developers had to build it into services, into products, into websites directly. It's now abstracted to a secure service that, you know, we use a lot of the Microsoft services, and that's secure, that's hosted, that has its governance around it, and we just help implement. I always say, you know, we are using the service as a platform, and identity is just a business problem. And we are using standard platforms to solve those business problems. That's what we do. We use known, proven interfaces, you know, that's been security vetted around the world, used in millions of different services. We're using platforms that are security vetted, have all the accreditation. You know, it is just a business problem. We have the eye to help you solve those kind of business problems. Our customers help those kind of business problems, and we just help them through the process, you know, both from the technology side, from a governance side, from the legal bits in there.
And that's great. That's a great summary there, Chris. And you said so many cool things in there, but I do want to clip your opening one and have it on some sort of red button I can press when you said it's not too hard categorically. I rather enjoyed that. There we go. We've heard it. It's not too hard. But I suppose, so what we've done there is we've busted the kind of almost the two biggest myths quite nicely. But I suppose next is, if those aren't the blockers and the barriers, okay, and you guys, you know, have got a massive amount of experience across government in some extremely key areas. What are the barriers? What are the barriers you actually have seen? What are the genuine challenges that the public sector faces when they're coming across identity?
I guess, you know, in any sector, you know, public sector is like any sort of business, an investment, you know, through it's ensuring that we can provide value for money. Digital identity can be seen as a complex procurement process. There are a variety of different technology providers out there working to a number of different, sometimes unregulated or non-standard technologies. So what we are seeing, thankfully, in the market is there is an increasing amount of standardization on frameworks for digital identity to show what a good identity provision can be. And it's also making sure that as we deal with sort of both data and identity, that the risk be managed. You know, things like multi-factor authentication or MFA can help mitigate the risk of people relying on a single attribute, and also just by making sure that that data is held securely, preferably in a cloud-based storage, so you're not relying on a single repository of information, which is maybe more liable for a data breach. Things like that can be those views that are blockers or barriers, I guess, initially.
The interesting thing, and it comes back to, you know, I'm not native, as you might be able to hear, but there's one UK specific big blocker, which we don't have an identity number. So we are one of the few countries in the world that doesn't have a unique identity number for their citizens, and it's very service or department specific, and that's our whole history with this big project of Verify Gov UK, you know, of trying to help our citizens to identify themselves to government. Because in other countries, you have a person number in Scandinavia, and with that person number, you're very identifiable. So we have this challenge of a citizen coming to government, and if they only transact digitally, match that citizen to something we already know about the citizen or something we can get to know. So, and there's new technology that can help us with this. You know, there's loads of new good online identity verification partners and like Onfido or Yoti that help the citizen gather their identity documents and prove them to them, and then give them back to us or back to the government and say, hey, do you have a record about me in your database? And the point of those barriers is that there's always the old story around this liability. So what happens who is going to pay, who is liable if something goes wrong. And my story around this is, it's like with every transaction, you need to ascertain the risk of the transaction, and then based on that risk, build your model up. And the nice thing about identity and identity type of platforms we are providing is that you can be quite dynamic in that risk mitigation. You do risk scoring, and based on that risk scoring, you build up your identity profile. And what you're doing is, well, maybe I need to use more than one identity verification partner. Maybe I need to use other data points that the citizen can bring to the story to prove that they are the right end on the other side of the computer that I can share data with. So those stories become far richer. Yes, maybe it looks complex, but actually it isn't. And there's this other story around data sharing. In the good old days, it was really hard to share data between government departments. Actually, we don't want to share data between government departments. That's against our citizen rights. We don't want to be tracked across different departments. However, if it enables a use case for me as a citizen to easier transact with a new department, I'm very willing to share my data, but it's me who makes that decision. So it's active consent of a citizen who, I might have a driving license, and over short or long, I will have this driving license in a digital form. So when I have a driving license in a digital form, or a passport, or some other license, in a digital wallet, this is this new form of identity where I, as a citizen, I as a data subject, actually hold the data attributes in my hand, and it's assurable. So I hold this data attributes digitally in my hand, or better, in my wallet, in my mobile device. And then I consciously share this with another government department to enable this transaction to be smoother, to enable onboarding to be smoother, to mitigate risk. If they determine, well, yes, you seem to be Chris, but why, Chris, are you now in England and not in Scotland? So based on that, I can give a bit more factors because they determine the risk. And that risk scoring becomes important, and actually it becomes easier and easier. There's a great use case, I think on the Microsoft side somewhere, that there's the service on the Dynamics Fraud Protection Service that's just been released during COVID, where one of the state governments in the US saved, 500 million US just by introducing this in fraud. Wow. A brilliant ROI on just using identity, using fraud detection, using Dynamics, plugging it in, and you have instant gratification, ROI really on your investment.
That's brilliant. That's a great answer there, Chris. Thanks for that. And I suppose also then I'd lead on to, so we've established the myths, the barriers, the potential, some of the blockers, that they're not insurmountable. I suppose for the guys listening out there, where have you actually already seen or helped people to get over these? What's some great sanitized stories you can share with us on where this has already been done well? Who's taken the leap?
So we've had the good fortune to be able to work with a number of central government departments across the UK. Geography is not a barrier, which is great. And in a number of scenarios, we get engaged at a very early stage because they want to consider what the overall architecture is. So it can be a case of have a look at initially, see what the solution they have in place. And at the first case, give them the art of the possible, show what the architecture solution could look like, or what the end product could, and the data path and data migration. So maybe, Chris, if you can give a little bit more detail on one anonymized use case.
Well, one of the interesting things is when a department brings us in early and we help them with their strategy for identity. We help with a cross-departmental strategy, how to bring those different services together. Bring up a new identity system that works across of it, and then have a migration path for all those existing services in in a manageable form, in an investable form as well, helping them going through all the governance hurdles of, you know, the security architects, the security boards, but also the infrastructure architects, the different service owners, you know, because they have concern about their service being modified and being different. So helping them through that, and you know, so all of a sudden you have big use cases where you have big citizens who represent organizations who need to log into services to still receive their grants or still need to make applications, but those same citizens also needing to be, you know, we have a few more requirements now with export import, you know, that's a huge service that wasn't there before but needs identity. And if you already have citizens who do this grant application, they then in their organizational role can also log into other service. That's a great reuse of identity, makes the whole service use cheaper as well.
Brilliant. And I know we're probably sailing close to the wind with time, but I think we'll throw in the comment here that, you know, I'm sure Condatis, you've got some great bits that you can share that maybe we'll throw some links to in the description and comment section of this podcast, because I'm conscious that we've barely scratched the surface of some of the great work that you guys could talk about.
Yeah, thanks, Aaron. Yes, there's loads of stories to share. And yeah, we have a YouTube channel with quite a few stories on that as well, technical and use cases. But also, you know, we have had a great partnership with Microsoft, because we were one of the first UK partners to bring this whole packaged external identity product on Azure to the UK. And we're working on with this engineering team there on this new story on decentralizing identity. And that's a whole new podcast by itself. But decentralizing helps make it even easier for the citizen. Now, the main story, I think, is, or the main message is whatever we are doing now, we always make sure it's convertible in the future. It's future-proofing. So an identity strategy needs to look into the future, not just deal with the problem at hand right now. It needs to be able to look into the future and see what's coming there, and how can we make it even easier and more secure and less risky in the future.
Brilliant.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for those discussions. We've learned so much today. We've heard about the art of the possible and the use cases we've done. We've realized identity is now a business problem, Chris, as you said. We've got the tech ready on our side. I'm conscious that our listeners would be interested, and we've also brought about the decentralization topic as well. So we'll certainly have more interest. But is there any lasting thoughts you would want our listeners to go away with? Maybe one each from all of you that you think is super critical and would want our central government customers to focus on and maybe have discussions with us on.
Yeah, I think I'd say, I mean, first, thanks to everyone for being a part of this. But second, those myths we've busted, you know, have a good hard look about the relevancy of if they are actually real or not. And something both Chris's have said a lot today, that whole point around starting with your strategy. What are you trying to drive? Where are you going? And building up from there, not trying to jump to the solution in the end state, but actually building that groundwork and that foundational work first. The why you're doing it, what the aim is, and growing from there for me.
Yeah, I'd just like to say thank you very much again to Anjan and Aaron for giving us the opportunity to, I guess, give our view. I would say, you know, we're obviously living in a global pandemic, but it has brought into sharp relief the need for all businesses as well as government organisations to know your customer or know your citizen, and then to ensure that access to data is appropriate and commensurate. So I strongly believe that, you know, that digital identity framework can help facilitate that department business need, and obviously we're looking to see how decentralized and distributed data can make it even more robust and secure, and we're obviously delighted to keep working closely with Microsoft to bring that into reality.
Chris?
I think one little tidbit I'd like to say is, yeah, try to not use passwords. Try to use MFA or wallets or digital identity wherever you can. You know, password is the weak spot in here. You know, we have better versions than passwords now.
Brilliant.
Brilliant. That's a wonderful point to close. I think, Chris, that is amazing, and the discussion we've had is fantastic. So again, I would love to take this opportunity to thank all of you for your participation, for sharing the insights, for sharing your experiences, for the challenges that our customers have faced and continue to face, and then how we can help and support them. So with that, I would officially close this podcast, but I'm hoping all of our listeners enjoyed it. And as we said, other links and related information to this discussion, you can find it in our comments section of the video. So with that, thank you so much, everyone.
Cheers, Anjan. Cheers, guys. Take care.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.